Si Violetta est vraiment décédée, c'est de savoir où elle a été inhumée.
Tonight, Manawan's ghost baby's mystery may soon have answers.
We don't grow cows in waters. Why on earth would we grow salmon on land instead of our oceans?
Plus, the two sides of First Nations salmon fishing hit Parliament Hill. And a classic fave sung in Inuktitut. Good evening, Tanse Anine. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Daryl Stranger. For decades, the community of Manawan has lived with a piece of hidden history known as the ghost babies. At least 25 children died or went missing after being sent to hospitals. For more, here's APTN's Lindsay Richardson.
This is the kind of home Delima Flamand's known most of her life, full of light, life, and laughter from her daughters. Today, Delima's in her 90s, and life in Manawan's long-term care home is quieter. But her daughter Annette comes often to visit, binder of paperwork in hand, hoping to one day bring news of a long-lost child Delima never got to know. She tells APTN the story she's told so many times over about how she gave birth to a daughter, Violetta, while in a tuberculosis sanatorium outside of Manawan. How her healthy baby died suddenly and was buried before she could see the body.
Si Violetta est vraiment décédée, c'est de savoir où elle a été inhumée. Puis il y a la grosse décision qu'on va devoir prendre aussi, c'est advenant qu'elle est vraiment décédée, qu'est-ce qu'on fait du corps? Est-ce qu'on demande qu'elle soit rapatriée ici pour qu'elle puisse être enterrée auprès des autres membres de la famille?
You'd think this would be easy information to find, but the paper trail is misleading. While her medical file says she died at 4 weeks old, the parish record says she died after 740 days.
Ce qu'on cherche, c'est la vérité. Puis je pense qu'à partir de là, il y a un processus de guérison qui va s'enclencher.
Delima took her story to the MMIWG inquiry, which concluded that this story and a handful of others are not isolated cases. They're known as ghost babies. They come from over 100 Innu and Atikamekw children who disappeared after being hospitalized outside their communities between the 50s and the 70s.
À la Manawan, on a dénombré 25 enfants.
Okay.
Et il y a 18 familles jusqu'à maintenant, là.
Pierre-Paul Nikwe works for Awashak, a community association named after the Atikamekw word for baby. For a few years now, they've tried to provide comfort to families of the missing, but now they press institutions like hospitals, cemeteries, and churches to turn over records, and quickly.
Il faut pas qu'ils ressentent de la honte ni de la culpabilité. C'est pas eux qui sont responsables de cette situation-là. Toutefois, s'ils restent dans l'inaction, ils pourront porter le poids de la culpabilité et de la honte.
For years, the government did nothing to respond. But in 2021, Quebec adopted Bill 79. It's an access to information bill known as the Babies Law, appointing a special advisor to assist families in their research and put legal pressure on institutions refusing to cooperate. Good news for those who need it, like Viviane Echequan Nikwe, who has 3 different death dates for her little sister, Lauriana.
Il y a eu 27 octobre. Puis au presbytère, c'est le 28 octobre. Puis l'autopsie, c'est le 30 octobre.
Then there was the funeral itself.
Quand il est arrivé là-bas, mon père, ma mère disait au salon de funérailles, quand on est arrivé, le cercueil était grand, on dit, alors que ma soeur, il avait juste 2 mois et demi. Puis le bébé qui était là, on dirait qu'il avait 10 mois, 11 mois.
Indian Affairs Canada still has an active status card number on file for Lauriana, begging the question, could she be alive?
C'est dur de vivre ça, là. Même quand je m'en vais en ville, quand je vois des personnes qui ressemblent à un autochtone, je regarde puis je me dis, C'est peut-être ma sœur.
Families have had to find ways to commemorate their loss in the meantime.
On sait qu'il était déjà à l'article le 28 juillet.
This empty Tikanagan was built to honor Manon Ottawa's uncle, known as Baby Maxime, who died after being treated in hospital for a skin condition.
Tant qu'on n'aura pas de réponse sur la disparition de bébé Maxime, on ne mettra pas de tissu. Il y a eu Marie-Madeleine, un bébé mort-né, Joseph Paul.
Angèle Petitcoué already knew her mother had lost several children in her lifetime and decided to do something to remember them.
On s'est assis, c'était justement avant le dépôt du rapport de l'FNDA. On confectionnait des petites robes rouges. Et puis, c'est là que je lui ai parlé de mon projet.
This is how she found out about her identical twin brothers, Jean-Pierre and Jean-Guy, who disappeared as babies. After hearing others testify at the MMIWG inquiry, she made a report to police and started doing research, but hasn't yet asked the government for help.
On ne sait pas si on va trouver justice. C'est quand même beaucoup d'injustice.
So what could have happened? According to the MMIWG summary report, some witnesses are convinced the babies were kidnapped to be used in medical experiments or sold to non-Indigenous families. Another theory, an epidemic or an outbreak of notifiable disease authorities refused to control as a form of genocide. The report recommended a public apology from the institutions involved. But is the Quebec government considering reparations? Indigenous Affairs says...
Honnêtement, non. Quand on est venu me rencontrer, quand les aînés sont venus me voir, ils m'ont dit, exemple, ma mère est rendue à un âge X, elle va décéder sans avoir la réponse. L'urgence, c'est ça. Alors, on ne dit pas qu'il n'y aura pas d'autres étapes par la suite, mais là, la priorité, c'est de trouver l'information.
It's said that here, in Manawan, mothers used to wait on the riverbanks, watching planes fly overhead, hoping for news of their missing children. And just ahead of the anniversary of the baby's law, so many still maintain hope that answers are somewhere on the horizon.
On est quand même résilient. On n'est pas abattu par ça, mais on veut connaître la vérité.
Quebec's Babies Law Status Report will be released in Manawan in the presence of these families at the end of April. Lindsay Richardson, APTN National News, Manawan, Quebec.
Two remote northern Manitoba First Nations are suffering after a long string of tragedies. Opipa-Napawan Cree Nation just declared a state of emergency due to critical incidences in the community, and now there has been a third death in St. Teresa Point. The community, about 450 kilometers north of Winnipeg, is reeling after the loss of two 14-year-old girls who froze to death outside of a home over the weekend, including Dana Shingus, seen there. Now, the Island Lake RCMP say they were called to an accident on the ice road on March the 1st. RCMP believe a 39-year-old woman hit a 43-year-old man, and he died of his injuries. She is in custody following a charge of criminal negligence. And the woman who accused the Catholic priest of an indecent sexual assault she says happened more than 50 years ago will have to wait a few more weeks to hear if the court finds him guilty. The Winnipeg trial for retired Oblate priest Arthur Massé heard closing arguments today. Massé was charged last year following a lengthy RCMP investigation. Victoria McIntosh was only 10 years old at the time of the alleged assault and a student at Fort Alexander Residential School where Massé was an administrator. Massé's defense suggested McIntosh fabricated evidence and that she was motivated to lie to advocate for other residential school abuse survivors. The prosecution urged the judge to consider that it was Massé who was not to be believed when he said he was innocent. Justice Candace Grammond reserved her decision to March 30th. All right, we have to step aside for a moment. Plenty more news still to come. Welcome back to APTN National News. It's uncommon for two competing groups of First Nations to hold press conferences in Ottawa on the same day, but that happened on Tuesday. Both were on Parliament Hill to lobby politicians on British Columbia's open net salmon fish farms. One group wants the industry left alone, and the other wants it shut down. APTN's Fraser Needham reports.
Up first on Tuesday was the Coalition of First Nations for Finfish Stewardship, where Chris Roberts told reporters the federal government needs to stay out of the fish farm industry.
People 5,000 kilometers away should not be making political, activist-driven decisions for ancient nations that have been stewards of their lands and waters and resources since time immemorial.
But a few hours later, Bob Chamberlain of the First Nations Wild Salmon Alliance was at the podium to say Ottawa needs to stay the course.
The message that we bring is the support from across British Columbia of First Nations for the Liberal government's transition plan to remove fish farms from BC oceans. We met with Minister Murray, thanking her for the work that she has accomplished on Discovery Islands, that we see this as a vital step towards the protection of the dwindling BC salmon stocks.
The Department of Fisheries and Oceans recently announced it will not be renewing the licenses of fish farms on BC's mid-coast, phasing out open net salmon farms by 2025. Opponents of the industry say open net farms harm existing aquatic life by spreading diseases such as sea lice. But Roberts says phasing out the farms is driving prices up.
And this piece of salmon is going to become even more unaffordable for you and your families if these decisions continue. Not only because it's imported from far away, but because we no longer have the jobs of farming salmon in the communities.
The suggestion has been made to move the farms from sea to land, but Albert Charlie, also with the Finfish Stewardship, says this is not a workable solution.
It makes no sense that the Government of Canada is trying to shut down sustainable salmon farming when its science says just that, it's sustainable. We don't grow cows in waters. Why on earth would we grow salmon on land instead of our oceans?
Either way, Chamberlain says, if the fish farm industry continues as it is, there will be no more wild Pacific salmon left to fish.
That we will see even more lower historic numbers return. And it's because of that reality that we see the intense need to take every effort possible, every measure that's at the tips of government decision-making to safeguard wild salmon from extinction.
Finfish Stewardship said responsibility for fish farms should be transferred from Minister of Fisheries and Oceans Joyce Murray to Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations Mark Miller, arguing fish farming is an inherent right. APTN News reached out to Minister Murray's office for comment, but did not hear back by airtime. Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
Well, Fisheries Minister Joyce Murray's office sent an emailed statement saying the federal government will transition away from open net salmon farming to protect wild salmon, but they will continue to consult with First Nations scientists and the industry. Well, After Me Too is an interactive website that allows users to submit their stories of workplace sexual harassment anonymously. APTN is a sponsor of the project, and Sue Gardner is executive director of the After Me Too charity and joins us now. Sue, thank you so much for joining us here on our news show. We'll start simple, and can you just tell us about this project?
Sure. So today we are launching a new website aimed at helping people who are experiencing sexual harassment at work in Canada. And it is a labor of love that has been years, 3, maybe 4 years in the making. And hundreds of people, experts, researchers, lawyers, sexual harassment experts, and mental health experts have come together to help us make this site.
Well, this sounds like a really incredible resource, and I'm sure many people will appreciate something like this. So why did you and the team feel that doing an online reporting system would be the best way to solicit some of these stories?
Yeah, the reason we picked it on the internet was because when we started our research process, what we found, we were extremely surprised. What we found is most people, when they get sexually harassed at work, they only tell 1 or 2 other people total. And a large number of people told us in our surveys that they had literally never told anyone that they had been sexually harassed until they answered our survey and they told us. And so what we found is people aren't talking to other people in their real lives. What they're doing instead is they're going on the internet privately, anonymously, late at night on their cell phone, whatever, right? Looking for information and looking for advice. And what they find there isn't always all that helpful because a lot of the information that they find is American because most of the information in English on the internet is American. That's not very relevant for people in this country because the laws are different. And we also found that a lot of what they're getting just isn't that helpful. So we did a really elaborate user-centered design process. We did a lot of surveys of people who'd experienced sexual harassment, and we asked them what they had found helpful when they were being harassed, and then we tried to give them that, right? So we think it's going to be really helpful for people because we really did base it on what they told us they wanted and needed.
And Sue, I know everything is just sort of officially launched today, but what's the response maybe been like since you guys have talked about this and started promoting this?
It's been pretty awesome. We've been in soft launch mode since December. So we launched in December. We targeted the official launch for today, but we've been out there and available to people, still tweaking the site and improving it, but it's been available for a couple months now. And we have a feedback survey on the site, and the feedback is fantastic. What we're hearing is 100% of survey respondents tell us they think the site will be useful to people, and 92% tell us they would recommend it to a friend, which is really important to us. And we asked people, if they would name like 3 adjectives that the site feels like to them. And the words that are coming up the most often are honest, warm, and friendly. And that's exactly what we wanted it to be, right? We didn't want it to be like a bureaucratic site or a legalistic site where you'd have to have a PhD to understand it, or it would just be kind of dry and not very accessible. We tried really hard to make it like your older sister. You know, you're sitting on the sofa with someone, you're telling them what happened to you, and they're giving you, we hope, good advice that's relevant and honest and will actually be useful.
Well, Sue, thank you so much for coming on and sharing a bit of what this is. Again, I think this is going to be a really incredible resource, and it sounds like people are already super appreciative of this. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Well, a new website was also launched by the University of Saskatchewan, which aims to reduce Indigenous identity fraud. The university's verification rules were the subject of scrutiny in 2021 when the identity of high-profile faculty member Carrie Barassa were questioned. Barassa resigned, and a committee struck in the wake of her resignation launched the website recently. It provides a process so that candidates applying for Indigenous positions can verify their identity. All right, it's time for one more short pause on the news. We have a beautiful photo of the day coming up. Stay with us. Welcome back. It's time now for our photo of the day. Today's picture comes from half a world away. Maya Lee Kelman shared this shot from Mingora, Pakistan, taken on a rainy day in the foothills of the Himalayas. Maya is a Piikani Blackfoot from southern Alberta, and she's currently visiting the indigenous territory of the Pashtun tribes. It's a wonderful shot there. If you want to be featured as our photo of the day, you can send them to share@aptn.ca or tag APTN News on Instagram. All right, now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Beginning over on the East Coast, 0 in St. John's and +1 in Charlottetown. 0 in Cartwright and -2 in Snow and Kuujjuaq. 3 degrees in Quebec City and 2 degrees in Montreal. 5 and clear in London and -1 in North Bay. -3 and clear in Wawa and -12 in Big Trout Lake. -15 in Churchill and clear and -10 in Norway House. -6 in Gimli and -5 in Winnipeg. -12 in Regina and -10 in Snow in Saskatoon. -12 in Buffalo Narrows and clear and -10 in Stony Rapids. As we head west, -10 in Fort Chipewyan and -9 in Peace River. Snow and -8 in Edmonton, and snow and -8 in Calgary. 9 degrees in Vancouver and 6 in Bella Coola. -3 in Prince George and -12 in Fort Nelson. -10 in Whitehorse and -10 in Rock River. -17 in Norman Wells and -11 in Trout Lake. -13 in Fort McPherson and -18 in Colville Lake. -26 in Cambridge Bay and clear, and -23 in Whale Cove. -23 in Snow and Resolute and -6 in Iqaluit. Well, this week on In Focus, we took a closer look at the corrections system and its relationship with Indigenous people. We heard from the APTN Investigates team, who will be premiering a series about different cases from prisons across the country. Here's a look.
I will admit that I had some preconceived notions about who Joey Tootsaint would be, what his demeanor would be like, given that he is a dangerous offender and he's been given an indeterminate sentence, which means that there's no telling when or if he's ever going to get out of prison.
He seems to have fallen through, every hole in a social safety net that you could possibly have to end up where he is. I mean, he admits to the things he's done, and he made his own choices, and he says he was a very violent man. But on the same hand, taken away from his family at 3, living on the streets, bad influences who got him into crime.
What did they have to say about their experience?
Definitely not a 4-star Google review, let me tell you that. Some of them wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy, is a direct quote. Horrible. One inmate described to me in detail being stabbed there, despite the increased security measures. But sometimes it's a little bit more, not as violent as that. Sometimes it's just the idea of spending so much time by oneself is incredibly difficult for mental health.
When the episodes aired on APTN Investigates, people took notice. Advocates across the country, Innocence Canada, David Bellegarde. So they've gotten a lot of attention because of that.
Well, part 1 of the 4-part series, 1,280 Days, premieres this Friday, March the 10th. All right, that is all we have for you tonight. If you missed any of our shows tonight or our stories tonight and you want to check them out, aptnnews.ca has you covered. I'm Daryl Stranger. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great night.